Hello. So today I want to talk about private equity firms. And I want to do this with a twist. So far, the PEF have managed over $8 trillion in assets in 2024. So that's $8 trillion. With a total value contributed by these firms growing to like $9 trillion in the first half of 2024. Now this represents a significant portion of the whole private sector, reaching over 14 trillion by the end of 2024. So basically, what is a private asset? Because that's what they're pushing here. Well, these are stock shares, which belong to a private network, as opposed to public assets. So you have private versus public, and I want to focus on this. So private assets. This is a stock. This is stock shares, which is money basically, privately transferable to said investors. Now these investors are institutions, as opposed to the public investor, who is a person. And so they, being you or me, let's say a person, we could transfer these assets and under the public, like in the public sector of investing. And basically, when you are an institution, you're pushing private assets, and so that's not what is accessible to public investors like you or me. You might have a portfolio, and you might, outside of your 401k, I don't know like what your business is, so that you could be investing, and you could be investing in, like, say, GoPro or something like that. You have shares in that company, and so on. But that's separate from the private equity firm arena. And so here, what the private equity firms, they're selling these private assets, and they go for the long-term hold, which, looking at what's called liquidity, it's at the flow rate, it's very low, and it's like a long-term hold, like from 5 to 10 or more years. And the reason why is because if you're one of these industries, you're going for the long haul, because you're building a financial empire, and so your goal is to make a lot of money, and that's what these private equity firms are all about. Now, if you look at an average person, like, you spend money, and so you invest, and you have like shares in something, and so like you use it for you use it for your retirement. You're not going to really be building a lot of capital if you're like 80 and retired. You're spending that money on yourself and your family or whatever. So that's the big difference between that, or you or us, and these investing firms. And so it's kind of like, and the reason why is because they're interested in making a lot of money. So they're accumulating. You think of a dragon that has a pile of gold, in their cave, or I tend to think of like Ebenezer Scrooge, that kind of a thing. So continuing with private assets, you experience less regulation by the government. with close to like zero disclosure requirements, which is the opposite of what you get with the public assets. So like with that, the government's all over it. There's ceilings, and stuff like that in place to, keep things in check, and there's more disclosure requirements and stuff like that. So obviously, if you really want to make buco bucks, and you don't do it as an individual, you're part of a big team. You're part of a private equity firm, and you're also on the receiving end. The investors, these investors they have a lot of money, so they want to get into the private asset type of exchange, because it's, in a way, it seems like it's under the nose, or it's behind the curtains, so to speak. The government is sort of like kept out, and so the referee is not included when you're dealing with exchanging of your private assets as opposed to your public. With your private equity, I guess, private equity, what are some examples? And so we're looking at like we're looking at venture capital. We're looking at debt, like debt. So anywhere where there's debt, what happens is you have to pay back that debt with interest. So that's a perfect thing to invest in, right? If you think about it. Okay, now another one would be real estate. And that leads us to the next one. The big kahuna, which would be is this. So infrastructure. Now, what is that? So this is your public transportation. Utilities. Like, what are some utilities? Think about some. How about power? Electricity. And how about water? Okay. Next is how about education? Like your education, like facilities, like your schools and your universities. Communication. And including other things like, how about bridges and roads and tunnels? But that's not all. But wait, there's more. Hospitals and healthcare. Let's just say healthcare. It's all connected. So let's just, for brevity's sake, hospitals, healthcare, etc. But even government, the government, administration buildings. So what does that tell us? All these things, like, think about it. What if there was no public transportation for us? What if there's no utilities? Like, if you have a house and there's no electricity and water, it's just like you're living in a husk or a shell of a shelter, Education. No schools, no universities, Communication, you can't call anybody. You can't the unit. Isn't that partly is that gonna include the internet? I think communication networks, all of it. You might want to do a lot more. Might want to do more research. See, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create a springboard for thought, and that's what my videos are. It's not encyclopedic. I'm not going to give you all the stuff like Cliff Notes for a test. It's like I'm no blue book like that. I just want to get you to think. Like like for myself, I started thinking about these things, and I'm like, wow, this is interesting. I bet others would like to think or talk about this stuff. So we're over here. So communication networks. I think it's all communications. And imagine if you had no bridges or roads or tunnels, how could you go anywhere? Okay, and healthcare. Let's not even get into that. And also like these buildings, like government administration buildings. So basically, all this amounts to these people. They control you. That's the number one thing you also want to take home here. And it's all about if you control the economy, so you have laws and stuff like that, but what if you control the economy? And that deals with like this. So what is economy today? What is economy without money? It's kaput. It's nothing. So this is all encompassing. This is it. So if you control the economy, you can control the laws, you control everything. So think about that. And it's to control us, to control you. That's what's happening here. Now, looking at this, I kind of like to do things like this, kind of like old school real time. I edit later, but I kind of like this style. I watch other people, and I went to school. I like the reason I want to be an instructor because I like some of my instructors. I go, wow, that looks kind of cool. So, and I think that if you just have a critical mind and you're able to go to the library and stuff, you could learn all sorts of stuff like what we're talking about here. And sure, you can get on, do stuff online. So, so your private equity firms, they're growing. And the which is basically assets under management. This is And what's funny is, ironically, that sounds like the Hindu sacred chant of the same spelling, or Om, or Om, or Om, or whatever. Okay, so and so this is growing. This is growing. This is growing. Like today to 230. It's growing by what? So right now we're looking at 8 to 9 trillion. And that's that's projected to grow up to this 30 trillion by 2030. So, what are some of the effects of this activity? What's happening across the board. So, so more companies are going to be under their ownership. They own, and so if they own, who are they beholden to? The investors. So there's something called efficiency measures. And this usually means to cut the fat. What does that mean? Anything that I, again, I'm kind of critical, it's hard to be unbiased, but so if there are efficiency measures, so it's if there's 20 people doing a certain job, say in this company, they have to have 20 people in that department. Oh, let's hire, 30 more. Make it one big happy family, kumbaya, create more jobs. Or do you think that cutting the fat would be okay, we have 30 or we have 20 people in the given department of this company. that does, whatever the service is in question. So we're going to cut that to like 10, and we're going to keep production at the same rate. So that's going to be interesting. That's going to be attractive to an investor. Like, oh, okay, you're saving money. So other things would be like, what if they had like an hour lunch? We're going to cut that to like half hour. And other fringe benefits. Some companies have like personal chefs. They cook for like the employees are considered important to the company, so they go and they get to have their lunches made for them. They have their own like food court and it's like, oh, this is good food. Well, why not change that and just have like machines, like what I mean, like concession stands or whatever. Replace anything with people and make it like something mechanical. They are cutting the fat and they're restructuring the companies, and they're making them look different. All these things are to save money and also to make more capital too, like increase production, streamline. And I think that with AI, I think that would be perfect. You automate certain things that people are being paid to do. So that's happening right now. So it's called efficiency measures. So you have that, and and this is to beeline, I think, the profits upwards to the most important people involved here, which are the recipients, and these are the investors. Then now, what they also do is they inject capital to their companies that they had purchased, and this is to be competitive. The above thing that I mentioned, like they're changing it. This is to make them competitive, and like, okay, wow, we want this, and so from our point of view, they're supposed to make it look like, wow, we want to go here. We like they might do something to the interior decoration of the place and the architecture. Oh, this is kind of cool, and they have a lot of ads and stuff. I think that's why they invest in all that. But really, pay attention. You go to any of these places, and including your schools, and see how the quality is of the service that you're getting. Just sort of like, be critical. Like, use discernment. Especially people who are older, like 40 or 50 or 60. Like you should be speaking up. Like, hey, this is not how it was. Minus the bells and whistles that technology offers. And I think that's what's distracting us here. And so the idea is to attract the buyers. Say, yeah, if we invest in this, we're going to make a lot more capital than the other guy. But really, they're consolidating, 2 or 3, parallel service providers into one. Really, and this is how they're removing the competition, which is, in a way, isn't that like against some of the fundamentals of real capitalism? I mean, just throwing it out there. So now costs increase, and this is true. Like healthcare, look into that, and you're probably experiencing it firsthand. Costs are increasing. You get the loss of jobs because you have to take like 20 people, reduce it to like 50, like 10 or 8, they can do the job of, whatever, 20 people. And also your AI, I think, is coming in automation. That's efficiency measures again. So this corporatization of America thing is now rampant also in, I think, our current administration. I mean, here's a perfect example of it. They fired like, how many federal employees, like 289,000 or give or take, and I don't think that like after, it goes back to like your Democrats, running things. Oh, we're going to give back all those people their jobs, or we're going to recreate those jobs, reopen up all these departments. I'm skeptical. Okay. So you got to wonder, if we're talking about the two wings of the same bird kind of a thing, I remember, so you have like, so you have like red. Well, actually, yeah, this is like, that's blue, and I don't have red, I got this, So that's pretty much what you got. it's pretty much like, Republican and Democrat. So it's like two wings of the same chicken. It's just sort of, like I say, it's the springboard stuff, to start thinking about it, look into it. And so, basically also with these, with this, again, the public investing of said assets are not available. You're not included. You're not a part of this, you're not a member of this club, so to speak, the big boy club. So also, more of what's coming from this is housing prices are skyrocketing. I mean, it's like, look into it. Like, okay, so what I'm saying is, like, look at how much a house costs now, and the floor plan, living room, dining room, and 3-bedroom, and maybe 2-bathroom, and whatever, and compare how much that costs now as opposed to, like, say, 2000. It's going to be a different figure. Check it out. And so housing prices have skyrocketed. And I think that what's happening is, as a result of all this, I think that we have two economies now as a result. And so number one economy is for the richer communities that are involved in this kind of a thing, and the private investing community, at large, so so the economy is doing great. The Dow Jones and all that. And you see those, those charts, like, hey, look at that, we're doing good. The charts go up for the Dow, for, Wall Street, and so it's like, okay, but how does that affect me? It's not going to affect you tremendously. And for some reason, the cost of living has increased because, make no mistake, that's one economy. The other economy is for, like the rest of us. And so, like, I remember Noam Chomsky talked about the 10% of the 1%, they pretty much run things. And so then you have the rest of us. I think also, to break this down, I think there's also called middle management, So it's kind of like, you have, like, basically, I just kind of like threw this down. So you imagine, like, what we have is, like, you have, like, somebody. So the way this is working is, like, so you have, like, the 10% or whatever, 1% of the 10%, and versus the rest of us, And so it's kind of like, if you think about it, you break that down. It's like, that way, you look at it. It's like, wait a minute. So, like, maybe somebody who's getting up to like 100 or 2,000 K an hour, or 185,000 or whatever an hour. They're convincing them, the people are getting like 100 plus an hour, that, like, earning $20 an hour, like, for minimum wage is just too much, So that's kind of like, what's happening. So, like, for the second economy, for the average person, I think the cost of life is the only thing that's basically rising, So, basically, these firms are good at one thing, which is to make more, like, replications of themselves. It's like, how can we just, multiply this? And it's contingent upon how much profit is being made, because that's what all this is, about. That's what all this is about. Number one goal is to generate more money. So basically, this is it. Dinero. You also remember how, we moved from the gold standard and all that. Like, I don't know if there's only way around it, which I don't think there was, because of our I think our system is flawed. I think that we are in late stage capitalism. I would love to get into that. And I'm still learning about it. So the idea is that the whole thing is, you have to make money from air. And so that way, the idea is to deregulate it. Deregulate the making of that, and find ways to, like, people buy back their own stock. You know, these big companies, they're purchasing their own shares. You know, they get these subsidies from the government, these corporations, and they wind up buying their own stock to really just, to get more of this. That's what's happening. So I don't want to stick with, this. But anyway, so we saw the negatives, some of the negatives of the PEFs on society, okay, at least from our perspective, or from our, from the perspective of our class, there's like these different classes, right? We're not of the same class as those people. And the reason they are flourishing is because they can exit. They find ways to sell. That's the whole purpose. They buy companies, they refurbish them, and they, efficiency measures and all that. So now they can sell it for a bigger profit. You see? And so that's why they're flourishing. And so basically they're buying these companies to sell to more investors. So, and that's what's interesting is, so it's like you have the seller and the buyer. So first of all, so what you have is they're selling companies to these investment firms. Investment firms, investment corporations, they're not one person, they're collective, like in that, So, and the thing is, what's happening with that, then this is like the stuff that these companies they sell to us, their services, and that's us. We buy this, we buy what they're, So what's happening is the investors determine everything of what comes down. So if you're at the bottom, so you're at the bottom of this. You're at the bottom. And so this is what you're getting from these companies is determined by because they control us. They control you, We looked at, how they're buying up all these infrastructures. So what exactly, private equity firm, a bullet, explanation of what the heck they are. And so it's like, qu'est-ce que c'est, Okay, so this is basically it in a nutshell. So what they do is they have this capital pool, you have your capital pool, and they get this from the investors. Okay, capital pool of investors. So what is this is, it's a way of just raising money, raising funds. That's the first thing they have to do. They have to have that. Why? So you can buy companies. And so one of the ways they can do it is if a company is struggling, sales are down, and the owner of the company is like, hey, maybe I'll sell it to a private equity firm. So you just take that money and just run, So that's to me, that's kind of like, taking advantage of something that's weak. It's like, don't buzzards do that? They eat they wait for the thing to die. For the buzzards will wait for their, the kill to be literally dead before they eat it. Anyways, I know I'm very critical here, so I want to pull back. And anyways, so they buy companies. One example are companies that are struggling. Let's say the incentive is, well, why should I sell it? Okay, the private equity firm comes and buys it. And so they purchase these companies, and they do the operational, efficiency thing, and they restructure it. and so it looks attractive to investment companies. And so like, okay, well then, hey, okay, so I think though this is for like a short-term profit, basically. It's all for like now, like I want to make money, like as opposed to like thinking like 2 generations on, or making it. It's not about, in other words, so it's not about making it a better world. Like idealistically, it's more about how can us who are involved in this can make more capital. I think that's what I mean by short term in this context. You got to hold, for like 5 to 10 years or whatever. But that's just a mass, that's what these firms do. So I understand that, but I'm talking about in terms of the bigger picture. It's short term in terms of the bigger picture. Like, they're not thinking 30 years out, 30 years down the line. They're thinking about like, what they're going to get. That's what I meant by that. So, anyways, so another thing is, so they collect money from these investors who want to play along, and then that's the raising the funds to buy these companies. And then they sell them. Okay, and this is your exit investment. Now, if you're an investor in this, that looks attractive to you. It's like, oh man, I'm gonna really make bank, And so the thing is, they're selling them to these other people for a higher cost. Okay, that's what's going on. So the question is like, why? Basically, it's to make more money. And the way they're doing it is they're replicating. Multiplying. But it's from nothing. Literally, that's what's going on. It's a way. All of this is to like, hey, I have a plan that will make us a lot more money. Because this is different than just backing up a company and having like the stock shares and that's it. This is multi-layered. There's more to it. You know what I mean? And so it's like that's what's going on with this. And so it's just all about making money, and that's it. Now, what are examples of PEFs? What would be an example? I don't even know like a couple off the top of my head. Like there's like these people, I guess a company and Company Incorporated, KKR and Company Incorporated, and Blackstone. Now these are 2 examples of the PEFs, but it's not the same as BlackRock. Now what is that? It's not a private equity firm. What they are is the largest asset manager in the world. All right, and but now they're getting more interested in the private markets. Okay, and so that's what So make no mistake. Can you imagine if this is like the biggest private equity firm on the planet? How much consolidation would take place? Just think about that. Okay, now it brings us, all of that stuff that I was talking about is to prepare us for what I'm going to discuss now. And so, what is that? What is a virus? So basically, a virus is an infectious agent that replicates itself by hijacking other cells, which serves as the host. So like think of Alien, the movie Alien. It's exactly what it does, just like that movie by Ridley Scott. So when the host dies, the virus will also eventually die. But by that time, it's already done this. So what it does is it hijacks the cell's ability to replicate, because other cells can replicate themselves. And so what the virus does is, well, I can't replicate myself, so I have to hijack you and get you to reproduce versions of me. Now let that sink in, okay, as we continue. So, but maybe we should also consider, bacteria, because this kind of helps us with what I'm wanting to push forward. So, bacteria are basically single cell organisms, like little single cell guys. And they have a membrane, and they also have what's called a nucleus. And a lot of complex machinery in there, like organelles, and they're called organelles. All these different things in here, they're called organelles. A very complex kind of machine. They're amazing. And so you would call, like, this was considered this is called a I don't know if I spelled that right. Eukaryote. That's basically what that is. It's a cell that has a membrane with all the organelles and all that stuff, all these different components in there. And then you have, and that's what a bacteria is. So a bacteria is that. Now, what is a? I'm sorry. A bacteria is not that. I'm sorry. So what is a bacteria? So a bacteria is not that. I almost had a brain fart moment. Okay, so the bacteria, though, so this is like maybe like your human cells, okay, and then they are the eukaryotes. But then you have these prokaryotes. They lack the nucleus. Okay, so that means that there's a little bit of a problem with the bacteria. They're not complete in that regard. So now the thing is, bacterias are not all bad. So there's a small percentage that can get us sick and maybe kill us. But there's a lot of beneficial bacteria. Like we have bacteria in the gut. So they have to go somewhere to live, you know what I mean? And so they have to, okay, so that's what they'll do. So that's what these critters are doing. And so now I think how they reproduce is, I think they do a kind of thing where they divide themselves on their own. That's what they are. They're I would say that an evolutionary course of how life developed, I think. Again, I didn't research this, but I've taken biology, I've taken science, and that. So you have the bacteria might have been around before, like these cells with nucleus, because one is more complex than the other, But I didn't want to stay with that. But I had to get into bacteria, and because some of the bacteria is good, and so I wanted to bring I had to bring that in for my idea here that I'm trying to unpack. Okay, so I want to talk about the bacteria and the viruses for this particular purpose. So we saw how the bacteria could be, good at one point. It's beneficial. or it's harmless. So, like, and I think that's kind of like how economists, I don't know, like how people treat investment, adventures in capital, like with the private equity firms. It's like, they seem to serve a purpose. Oh, let them be, let them multiply, And so, yeah, they're like bacteria in the gut. What if you got rid of all the bacteria in your gut? I think you'd have adverse effects. So it's like, no, we need them. But then, so I wanted to bring that into discussion. So what happens is over time, I think that this has changed, and now it's become a virus. And so that's it can't function without, taking from, because they get companies. And so anyways, so this is what this leads to. This is a bare botkin of the matter. So what I'm doing is, I'm going to make a T-chart. Again, I could have probably researched this more, getting into charts and diagram statistics, to back my argument. So this is more like a picture that I'm trying to paint, and so this is a springboard. So you have the PEFs versus your viruses. So we kind of looked at it. So now I have to eschew the definitions here just to sort of make this fit. It's kind of biased, but just hang on here. So first of all, the private equity firms, they do control the companies that they purchase. So they take over. They control. Okay. Now, what does a virus do? It takes over the body. It takes over the host. I mean, right? Are you with me so far? They have to borrow. There's something that they need to put into their bucket, and that is money from investors. So that's one thing that they have to take. They have to borrow. All right. So they borrow money. And so what does this have to do? They have to they hijacked reproduction system. Now this is where it gets interesting. I mean, just think about this. Why? So they do this. Oh yeah, and they also they do this to they have to they get their companies, right? So they do all of this. And they borrow and they take, and now they make these companies. And what happens is, by what they do to these companies, and this is going to be hard to swallow, I submit to the creating entropy. You take order, and that goes to a disorder. Order in the court. So, odor in the court. What did the judge say when the skunk entered the courtroom? Odor in the court. Okay. Odor in the court. Okay. So order to disorder. Now, I want to really blow up on that subject, where that's basically, if you look up what living organisms do, they create entropy, disorder. They don't create no new order. That's going the only way to create minus this, to reverse this, is to go back in time. We have yet to accomplish that. We don't know how to do that. To go back to a minus You know, like, so you have plus disorder. How do you make that into a minus? You can't. And that's what life does. Like, here's an example in life. I had like a chicken dinner. Well, guess what? Somehow that chicken had to have been, you know, exposed to entropy. Remember, entropy. You kill it. So then I eat it. So now it's to create new order. So that chicken becomes a part of me. So a system of order is released or dissipated to create another type of order. And that's what they're doing. I really think that's what they're doing. Because they buy these existing companies and they change them all up. And they're firing people. And so the idea is that as they do that, they have to figure out how can we make all sorts of money from this. And I would like to explore this. This is the thing that I need to back up in a future video, is to show examples of how companies before and after, in terms of the people's response. Like, what do people think? Like, oh, I like these apartments better now that they're bought by this, you know, this private equity firm. I like this, you know, this school better because they're bought out by this firm. I like this, that, the other thing. It's a better deal for us, okay, the customer. I don't think it's going to be easy to find that. Even though they might say that it is, they'll have commercials, ads and stuff to kind of like convince you, and they'll come up with some way, some kind of a rigmarole to get you to, you know, to bite, you know. But it really is just to make the companies appealing to the buyer. And we already had that little diagram, like, you know, these private equity firms, they create, let's just say they create businesses and they sell the businesses to their customer base, which are investment entities, you know, privately done. Like, so, you know, on the Queen Vivi, you know, okay. So that's what's happening. And so for me, this is a form of entropy because, like, I think that what's happening is it's a decreasing quality of life for the majority of people. And so an example is health insurance. My God, I was just talking to my mechanic today, and he was like, yeah, man, he was talking about how cars today, new cars today, they stink. And this guy was born with a wrench in his hand. So, like, he knows what he's talking about. And he's like, yeah, the new car, because they always come back in their shop. These cars are always going back in his freaking shop. And so I started telling him about private equity firms and what they are and how they're controlling the infrastructure. And one of the things on that list is what? Transportation, right? So think about it. So that's entropy. These things break down, and so it creates money so you break down an existing thing to create a whole new system. And so, like, eventually, like, I remember cars, they would last a lot longer, you know. Well, let's break that down and let's have them, you know, rake in the money for people who, so the idea is if you have money, you just go to the dealership and buy another car. Every 3 years, you just get a new car. You just turn around every 5 years, maybe, whatever. That just keeps this thing going. And so that's where I call that, you know. So, like, what's happening here is, so this also is replicating itself. And so over here, they also replicate themselves, you know, in terms of this, the money, capital. So that's what it's about. It's about, you know, replicating this. And so how, you know, so what happens is, as a result, like so back over here, they have like the exit scenario, right? So the exit sales, you know, it's like, hey, you know, time to sell. You know, we did what we did to your company. You know, we cut the workforce in half, you know. And so the thing is, it's like something on steroids. It's like, yeah, it's like a high performance machine, but I don't think it's for the long run. I think it's more like we make a high performance machine and make all this money, and the investors are making money. And then, okay, now the machine's gonna like collapse, but they kind of make it look like it's not. And then they sell it for a higher, you know, price to another buyer who probably is in on all of this, Okay, we'll do it again. I don't know. That's something I'd like to look into, but that's what's going on. So, and to me, this really smacks of entropy. All of this, and so basically what happens here is by this happening, it replicates itself by hijacking the replication system of the cell. And so what happens is it basically might kill the host. At least it harms it, And so you have that. So that's what's going on. That's why I made this comparison. And it's interesting, right? So now here's the thing to sort of like put a bow on this. So basically, us being the majority, like 99% is saying the majority. Okay, so like the 99%, the majority, right? What is that? For my model, that's this. We, the people, are the host. Let this sink in, because it's not just private equity firms anymore. It's the and it turns out like a lot of these people, at least in this country, they went to like they went to Harvard or Yale, and that's where they're learning how to do this stuff. They're learning stuff, and so they're like the high achievers, like performing achievers, and they're the ones running things, including the politicians. So basically, the 99% or the majority of us are the host. And then, so like to who? To whom? To the people, the private equity firms, the big time investors. Big time investors. And we're talking like the super elite wealthy, and also this. The rentier class. I think that's French. So, like, these people that, like, they don't make anything new. They, like, and this is something I like to get into. Like, so, like you have to occupy space. Like, we live in a, three-dimensional world. I guess the fourth dimension is time, it's like, we live in a fourth-dimensional world. But to keep it simple, we live in a 3D world. So you have to exist in something. And you have to exist in time. So this is space. Like, you are a physical, entity. You are, like Christopher Hitchens says, we don't possess bodies, we are bodies. Okay, fine. And so you're a body that has to exist somewhere in a given space. And so there are a class of people that say, okay, you have to pay me for you to do that. So you have to pay somebody money to live on the very thing that gave birth to you. Now, what gave birth to you? Oh, my mommy and my daddy, yeah. But if you go all the way back down the line to, like, your common ancestor, the earth gave birth to us. We come from the earth. We are from the earth. And this is the thing I want to, like, kind of finish this on. Like, we are from the earth. Like, can you imagine if animals in the wild have to pay rent to something else to live where they're living? Or doing what they're doing? Think about it. We're the only animal that has to pay rent so that we can live on the ground that actually, gave birth to us. And that's something to really take into consideration. And that's because of this class. And it all ties in with this. Because one of the things that these PEFs have gotten their claws on, yeah, so the gloves are off by this point, right? Is the housing industry, all right? And not only that, okay, you're a body, you're a body and you need a place to live. How about, food to go in that body? Well, guess what? It all connects to that because they're running that too. Everything in the infrastructure, they're getting their hands on. Everything. It all ties in with this. You go to school, you have to pay tuition. Nothing's for free. Think about it. And so this stuff is always going up to the 10%, 1%, or at least, and then you have the middle management who like, yeah, we work for this, we work for this system where, we'll tell the people beneath us that this is how it is. So they come to us and we go to the big boys. And it's all like this, hierarchical, pyramidal structure. I almost forgot to define what this is. So, 99% of us being the majority is a host to whom? The big time investors, venture class, and the PEFs. So what makes them? Okay, it makes them them the virus. Okay, that's something that I really wanted to get this off my chest, and so thank you for listening.